Hey, this is Stu for Love Yoga Anatomy, and I'm here again with Adell Bridges, which
Hello.
is fantastic because it gives us a chance to talk about hypermobility, which is super important with the yoga because many people think it's just a matter of just bending yourself into any sort of crazy shape, no matter what you're doing to yourself. But actually, it can be pretty important to know whether you have a tendency to being a little bit lax in the ligaments and whether you can actually take some pressure into places where they shouldn't go. So it's very much also about being strong and contained, isn't it? And Adell was, or is, still hypermobile by nature, so therefore it's great to be able to talk to somebody that's experienced the negative side of it and then also has done something about it in her own practice to try and become more integrated and more stronger. So we'll start by saying, how did you first figure out that you were hypermobile and not that you could just do everything?
Well, I started out just knowing that I was very flexible and didn't have the strength to balance it out. Because I went to a physio with pain, and that's kind of what started my yoga journey. Because a lot of physiotherapists will recommend yoga to their patients.
Right.
But I didn't realize I was hypermobile until I had already started teaching yoga, and I was already somewhat aware that I needed to balance my strength. I mean, I was already aware of it, but I didn't really understand that it was like a thing on its own. And I saw something online about an article about hypermobility and in yoga, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's me. So I started reading a little bit more about it. I found this test that is done usually on children, because usually children are often hypermobile. You know, they've got more bones. Like, that's how babies can just like eat their toes and stuff. But there's a test that you can do, and if you get 5 out of the 9 things, then you're considered hypermobile. I think 4 out of 9 if you're a man. And I had all 9.
So you had all 9.
Okay,
so some of the common ones that we see in yoga all the time, and common cues in yoga is like the elbows. Don't hyperextend your elbows. Don't hyperextend your knees. So you can look can we see where your elbow goes?
Yeah.
So if you can see that and you get that change of angle, then that's something you need to be really careful of in the yoga. So that would be one of the things. Adell, you have the hyperextending knees. Can we see those too?
So it's probably best if I stand up, side on. You can see that
she can lock out. And
if I lock my knees out, they're kind of bowed backwards.
Yeah.
And this is actually something I've worked a lot on. So it's not even as bad as it was.
And actually, when I was watching you doing a bit of demo earlier on, I didn't pick up on that. So you're obviously controlling it really nicely. Yeah, so that would be a good one. There's one to do with the thumb, isn't there?
Yes, if you can bring your thumb all the way down to your
wrist,
forearm.
And you can see mine doesn't go anywhere near.
Yeah.
And then fingers is another one.
Yeah, it's beyond 90 degrees, bringing the finger back.
So actually my fingers do go back a fair way, the little one, but not, beyond, not like that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So it's one on each side, left and right. So so 4 different things, that's 8 total.
Okay.
And then the 9th one is being able to place your hands flat with the knees straight, which is something a lot of us can do in yoga anyway. So just having 1 or 2 of these doesn't mean that you're hypermobile.
Yeah.
It's a combination, but it's actually oh my gosh.
I don't know whether you can see that on the camera, but we're sitting under a tree near the beach because we wanted to change of location. And we've invaded the crows' site. This is their ground.
That's what they think about hypermobility.
That's what they think of hypermobility. So if we start to get covered in it, we'll have to check. We'll have to move. So I think I'm just going to leave it there.
Okay.
to look at and cherish. It's a good luck sign, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's what they say.
So so if you see a number of these, particularly elbows, knees.
Yeah.
Then you need to start thinking about what you're doing and how can I contain it? How can I control it?
Yeah. It's very interesting if you look more into it. There's a syndrome, EDS. It's called. Don't ask me to pronounce the name of the person who it's named after, but and it actually goes into the thing that makes a person hypermobile versus just a very flexible person.
Yeah.
Is the ligaments actually have a lot of laxity, and so the ligaments are the soft tissue that holds our bones together, and if those ligaments are able to stretch beyond what's natural and normal, then the joints just become very unstable. But the reason this happens is because all of the soft tissues of somebody with like EDS or hypermobility is just stretchier. And so one symptom can be anxiety, for example, and this is because the blood vessels, the walls of the blood vessels are also stretchier, and so the body, so the way that the blood goes through the blood vessels, it's the same stimulus as adrenaline.
Okay.
Am I saying this right?
I have no idea. You're on your own here.
It's basically the body is recognizing it as stress, and so adrenaline is released, I think. Something
along
like
those lines. Make it up yourself if you're not quite sure, or read about it.
Yeah, if I'm not the expert on this deeper side of it, but it's very interesting if you look into it, the way that this syndrome can affect the whole body. It's not just the joints, actually.
Okay, so that's cool. So
yeah.
How did you go about changing your practice, the way you were doing things? So at the time, you were just sort of dropping into things and flopping around the place.
Yeah.
So what did you do to actively look after your body more?
Well, I realized that I could get into advanced postures, but I was getting there by pulling my leg or pulling myself around in a twist, or just flinging my leg, or flopping myself backwards, rather than moving there with control. And so I became a lot more aware instead of, and this is beneficial for anybody, whether they're hypermobile or super flexible or stiff as a board, to not just think about the asana that you're going into, but how you get there. I started paying attention more to the transitions than the asana itself.
Okay.
And not just moving there, seeing how much I could move there, just using my own strength rather than pulling or flinging. And by flinging, I mean using momentum.
Yeah. Or gravity even.
Or
Sometimes
gravity.
going backwards, you can just let gravity take you
Yeah,
back.
but rather putting myself there. So if I wanted to stop halfway through, I could. And then also using it as a transition from A to B, but then that transition back from B to A. Because that's another thing that I realized that all of us might get in the habit of doing in our yoga practice is, your sun salutations. You go from upward facing dog to downward facing dog, but maybe you never do downward dog to upward dog, or just as an example. So moving into these postures slowly, mindfully, with control, using strength, but then moving back out of them the same way I came in.
Yeah. Nice. So what we thought would be best is if then Adell shows you some of the ways that she's working in her own practice that you might also be able to incorporate as well. So I'm going to nip behind the camera and leave Adell to show you some stuff. And of course, I'm going to interfere, I imagine, from behind there. And that gives me a chance to clean my knee too.
Yeah. Not a good look, the bird poo. So... yeah, as I mentioned, even if you're just very flexible, you may not be technically hypermobile, but just being very flexible but without a whole lot of strength, then you might find that certain transitions are easy for you because you're, like I mentioned, you're using gravity or you're using momentum. And so I just want to share a few different things with you that maybe you do already in your own practice, and you can perhaps tweak them slightly just to build strength there and control. So, beginning in a Tadasana, as if you're going to go into a sun salutation, standing at the top of the mat. First of all, first move is from Tadasana to Urdhva Hastasana, this right here, how much do you fling your arms up and just kind of hang out there? And how much can you pay attention to what's happening as you lift the arms up? Maybe play around with a few different hand movements. So instead of external rotation, internal rotation, changing the muscle groups that you're using as you lift your arms up. Reaching high, stretching high. And then when we get to Uttanasana, the next pose in the Surya Namaskar, we know that we don't want to have the weight rocking back into our heels so much, but instead of waiting till you're back there to bring your weight forward into your toes, start to really press the balls of your feet and your toes down into the mat. As you lower, keep your hands up overhead. So you've got a little bit more weight to control, and the slower you go, the harder it is as well. And this can be a lot on the hamstrings. We're using a lot of strength here to hold the upper body and the arms up. So if it does get to be too much, you can bend just to protect the hamstrings. But you'll feel throughout the back of the body, the muscles are working. And so instead of just folding down, not doing anything, we're using strength. So next step would be, next asana, is our high plank. And this is just the number one pose, as I'm sure you know, for building upper body strength towards arm balances and handstands. And you, again, just want to make sure you're not sinking, but rather that every muscle is engaged. So pushing the mat away from you, using your shoulder muscles, and tucking the tailbone under to engage the abdominals, lifting the knees up. So everything is switched on, and if this is too much, drop the knees down, but not like this. Keep the tailbone reaching back towards the heels. Then lowering down to Chaturanga, keeping the elbows back. And I'm going to go ahead and go, instead of cobra, just straight up to upward facing dog. And again, it's easy to sink into the lower back, let the shoulders drop forwards, but this is an active pose, so lifting the legs up off the mat, pushing the hips forward, opening the chest forward. And then I think about like I'm doing crunches. In case you don't know what I mean by a crunch, like this, bringing the rib cage towards the hips. And I do that move from upward facing dog to downward facing dog. So I'm leading this move with my abdominal muscles, which we want to be very, very strong in order to protect our spine. So it's that crunch, like you're doing crunches, to get into downward facing dog. Then, what a lot of us flexy people like to do is just hang out here and sink down into the shoulders. But this is an active pose again. Basically make every pose active. If you feel like you can just relax there, then find a way that you can make it more work. Press down through the fingertips. Bring your triceps back to really engage through the shoulders, and press the heels down, reaching the tailbone up. So again, I'm using all these muscles in my shoulders instead of just sinking down. Now, next move. Take the right leg up. I like to do this nice and slowly to bring the foot between the hands. So instead of flinging, easy, bring the knee forward, but then bring some engagement into the leg. So bring the knee as high up towards your chin as you can, but don't forget about the bottom of your leg. Bring the heel up to the glute as well. Maybe even point the toe for a little bit of extra work. Then rocking forward, flex the foot. Place it down as slowly as you can. Bring the left knee down, or whichever leg you've got in the back. And again, before I even bring my weight back into my hips and off my hands. I engage all of the muscles around my hips to protect my pelvis, to protect my lower back, to stabilize my pelvis, I should say. So squeezing my glutes, squeezing my thighs together, then lifting up. Now I'm going to suggest you bring your hands to your hips so that you can feel for yourself if your hips are really stable or if they're kind of sinking down one way or the other. And this is where the ego might come in. Maybe you're used to being really, really deep in this and you're like, look how pretty I am because I'm so flexible. That's your ego. Take it back. Stabilize the pelvis. Make sure it's nice and square. Then see how deep you can go without letting the integrity of your alignment drop. Now my back toe is still tucked under, and that's because I'm going to use my own strength to pull the heel towards the glute. And maybe just do that a few times. You'll start to feel quite the workout in the hamstring. Once you get it as high as you can, maybe point the toe for a little bit of extra oomph. This is how I always do this kind of stretch. So then it's nice to take the hand back there and pull on it a little bit more, get a little bit of a deeper stretch. But I've gotten there first using my own strength instead of this kind of thing. So this right here, I'm not working. I'm not doing any kind of active engagement of the muscles. I'm just slumped over here. Whereas this, I've got my muscles working and lengthening. And this is the benefit of being flexible, is you can get yourself into positions that maybe other people can't, and from there, in that position, you can build strength. So you're getting some really good benefits. So it's not entirely a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all, actually. So we can apply this same thing for maybe your Ekapada Rajakapotasana. Instead of, again, just reaching back there and pulling yourself into it, play around with lifting. And same thing with the shoulders. If you're going up and over, instead of going around sideways and hoiking yourself up. Is that a word? Hoiking?
It's good for me.
You can have one hand down to stabilize yourself. Play around with building the mobility through your strength to reach back there. Maybe try it with the other hand. It's a little bit harder. Yeah, there we go. What else? Back bends. If you're hypermobile, then it's likely that you've got a very bendy lumbar spine. And a lot of us, even, again, I think this goes for everybody. I like to teach this to all of my students, not just the hypermobile and flexy, bendy ones. Camel pose. Maybe you're here and you really like this one here, and that's how you get there, and then you come out of it like that. Again, just kind of putting yourself there without any real control. So instead, you can have your hands on your hips, or maybe at Namaskar, whatever works for you. But engage first before you even move back there, before you even think about moving back there. Switch the glutes on, engage the abdominals, squeeze the thighs together so that the pelvis is stabilized and we're not going to then get this dumping into the lower back. Then move into it with everything engaged, and you might even find that, hang on, I can't go back as far as I'm used to being able to go back, and that's fine. Reach the chest up so we're opening through the front body, and just go back as far as you like, as far as you feel awesome, and then come back the way you came. So it might just be a very small, gentle movement, but coming back the way that you came is going to build a whole lot of strength. And then maybe you reach back there But instead of twisting yourself around to get back up, you're going to use those muscles to come back the way you came, keeping this squeezed, this engaged, the inner thighs engaged, the abdominal is working. And again, it's like that crunching action, like you're doing crunches, except you're starting in a back bend. And so it's really good for that transverse abdominis. And you're going to feel it. I hope so anyway. I definitely feel it. And it's so good for building strength in the muscles that really count. I would apply those things to all of your asanas. So whatever kind of back bending you're doing, make sure that you move into it slowly with control, with strength. With any thing as well, in this kind of capacity, using your strength to get yourself there. So another one I really like is dancer pose. How many of us reach back and just It's a challenge. I'm not going to lie to you, but it's a good fun challenge, I think. Bring the heel up to the glute. Take the arms up. Reach the chest up. And engage through these muscles to lift the foot up behind you. Bend the elbows. Maybe, maybe that happens. Might take a while to get there, though. Maybe it never happens, but it's just an amazing opener for the front of the body, but using strength instead of flinging.
And what about maybe some of the more traditional straightforward postures like Trikonasana and Parivrtta Trikonasana?
Oh.
How do you work in those sorts of ones?
I'm glad you asked, because that's super important. If you've got knees that hyperextend, this is going to be, if you're anything like me, this is going to be your biggest challenge. To keep a micro bend. Something like Trikonasana especially is difficult because, again, it's just so easy. If you're locking out the knees, you can kind of hang there, and you maybe in your yoga class you're looking around at all the super muscular guys and they're like struggling, and you're like, this is easy. Bend your knees a little bit. You'll be struggling too, but it's awesome because that means you're building strength. So instead of this, put a little micro bend in the knees before you even move into it. And to do this, you might even feel that all of these leg muscles in the lower and upper leg are working. And that means that the knee is stabilized then. Then move into it with your Trikonasana. Pressing down to the outside of the back foot. So Warrior 2 is another example. Don't let this happen with the arch of the foot coming down. Pressing the outside of the foot. Little micro bend in the knee. Obviously the front knee is bent. And maybe again, taking your hands to your pelvis, checking if you're kind of sinking or hanging out somewhere. Basically, the more a pose becomes challenging, the more benefits you're getting from it. I always say, especially about like Uttanasana, the more you hate it, the more you're probably getting out of it. So Uttanasana, this is just one for everybody. Make sure that you're not in the toes, but pushing back towards the heels, keeping the knees back as much as you can, and tucking the tailbone under. You can do a sort of cow shape Uttanasana as well. I like that one, nothing wrong with that, but a great one for building strength. And if you're coming in your Surya Namaskar B from here into your Uttanasana, again, don't just lower down. Slowly with control, bring your hands down.
And you mentioned as we were talking at the beginning, about twisting as well, and actively turning into twists rather than just waking yourself around. Yeah,
so a nice place to start there. I like just sitting back on the heels, because then your pelvis isn't really going to be able to move much at all anyway. And taking your hands to Namaskar, so you can't use your hands. And then from here, inhale, lengthen, and exhale, twist. And I'm leading with my hands, with my chest, so that the twist comes from my thoracic spine. It's not the shoulders, it's not the neck, and it's certainly not the pelvis. So just twisting around there as much as I can, just using my own strength. Then when I know I can't get any further, take the hands down and maybe just get a little bit of more of a stretch there. But everything's already stabilized because I've gotten there with my core strength. So going around the other way. And then when I know I can't get any further, and I'm not twisting my shoulders round, I'm getting there just with my thoracic spine, then adding a little bit more, and then you can take the head round. Get a twist through the cervical spine as well. But we've got there through engaging and keeping everything nice and stable. So then the challenge becomes when you're in, say, a low lunge and you go to twist like this. And I know how you do it. If you're like me, you're like kind of, see how, look how deep I can go. I can get the bind. Take the ego out of it. Keep the hips up a little bit instead of sinking way down. And engage. Twist around with your own strength. Maybe you don't even sink the hips down too far. Because the more you do that, the more this stuff kind of happens. Keeping everything in line, you're going to feel it. And the thing is, it gets easier and easier. You'll start to be able to move into your full range of motion, or maybe 90% of your full range of motion, just using your own strength. And it's going to make your practice so much more fulfilling. You're going to feel awesome. Any aches and pains that you may have may alleviate just by building strength around all of these very important joints, like the pelvis, the knees, the shoulders, and the lower back.